All right, without further ado, Perek Yudchet, chapter 18, Pasuk 7, Zion. When we last left David, he had indeed become our hero. He had just slain Goliath. He had just slain Goliath, and everybody loved him. Everyone. At this point, even Shaul, Saul, loved him, and his son Yehonatan loved him. And even though there was a natural competition, or one would expect it to be natural competition between David and Jonathan, because each same throne. The Mishnah describes the relationship between Jonathan and David as the ultimate friendship, a love that is not dependent on outside factors. Love simply for the intrinsic value of the person and not because of anything that they have to offer you. And we'll see that relationship manifest as we continue reading. But the fateful moment when everything started to change was in Pasuk 7, in verse number 7, as Shaul and David were touring, after all the victories, the women came out and they started praising and singing, and they say, Hika Shaul ba'alafav v'David b'rivevotav. Shaul slayed thousands, and David slayed tens of thousands. Vayichar LaShaul me'od, and Shaul became extremely upset. Vayira beinav, and this was bad in his eyes. And he said, they gave to David the tens of thousands, and me the thousands. Shaul suddenly became jealous that they praised David a higher praise than they praised Shaul, which is, it seems so petty. It seems so petty, right? You're getting praised, and you're the king of Israel. You got a lot going for you, Shaul. But as we said, Hashem had rested a somber, sad spirit upon Shaul, almost supernaturally bad. And this is part of the natural transition out of the supernatural transition, Hashem's providence, transitioning Shaul out of this throne. And Shaul says, "What did you say?"
Why do you think Shaul was so jealous?
I think that when the spirit of Hashem left Shaul and went to David after David was anointed, from there we see already he was falling into these depressive modes where he needed somebody to come play music for him to lift his spirits, and things were just going wrong. So probably just like a buildup of those negative emotions, and also, human beings and honor. He became nervous over his throne. He just saw this young, good-looking man who's exceedingly humble. Everybody loves him. He saw him do what was to everybody impossible. He saw him slay Goliath. And while he did that, while Shaul was shuddering behind the front lines and afraid to do anything, David was one who stepped forward and acted. So David was doing all of the things that Shaul ought to have done. And this naturally could lead to a feeling of jealousy and fear over his own position. In fact, that's the words that Shaul himself says in the end of Pasuk, Pasuk Tes, in the end of verse 8, rather, in the verse of Pasuk Chet, he says, Ve'od lo achem melucha, all that he lacks is the kingship, as if to say he saw David coming for his throne. Not David actively pursuing it, but he saw that, if things continue on this path, David's going to take over my throne. And this was very terrifying. Now, again, everything we read in the Navi, we have to apply it to the people we're talking about, so Shaul was still a tremendous person, a spiritual giant. But on his level, this seemed to be a petty act of jealousy. Okay, so in verse number, I can't tell the psukim here. It looks like it's 9, Tes. Vahi Shaul oyen et David mehayom ahu v'hala. Shaul was eyeing David from that day and forward, keeping an eye on him. Now, keeping an eye on him means he was very suspicious of David. And now we're going to see a series of attempts to kill David, literally to murder David. And it begins with this, in verse number 10. It was on the following, Macharat means the following day. I don't know if it means literally the next day, or it could just be, like a short while later. And the spirit, again, the spirit of melancholy comes down from Hashem upon Shaul. So the scene is Shaul is depressed in his palace, And once again, David is called to play music for him, and Shaul is holding his spear. It's interesting, there's a word used here. It says, Vaitnabe betoch habayit, which literally mean, or should mean, and Shaul was prophesying inside the house. He was having prophecy. Nevuah, vaitnabe. But he was not having prophecy, he was just depressed. So Rashi says, he quotes the Targum, Vishtate, he was going mad, he was going crazy. Because there's one thing that crazy people and prophets share in common. They say things that people don't understand. So Shaul, the word is prophesying. He was speaking as if he was a prophet by uttering these things that were strange and weird. He was in such a sad state that he was saying things that were nonsensical. And that in Hebrew, interestingly, is called Beit Nebeh. But the actual word Nevuah is referred to, it means utterance of the lips, Niv Sfatayim. So he was just uttering things that people didn't understand. He was in a weird, depressed state. And sure enough, they bring David over to play an instrument. Okay, so here's the scene. Shaul's in his palace feeling sad. David comes to play his harp. Shaul is sitting there holding his spear. He takes the spear and, trying to do it secretly as if he's doing target practice or something, he throws his spear towards David, but he wants to make it appear as if he's just training, like target practice, and throws it up to towards the wall. Sure enough, at that very moment, David happens to turn out of the way, and the spear misses him. That's this verse number 11. Shaul thrusts the spear, and he says to himself in his mind, I shall strike David and the wall, meaning I want the spear to go through David and strike him against the wall. He was trying to commit murder. And David turns away twice. David turns away twice, which means he happened to just turn at that moment. And then Shaul became very fearful. He realized that God was with David. I just tried to kill this young man twice, and he happened to have turned out of the way. And he says, "This is not good news. I see that God is with David and not with me." I once read a similar story about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein when he was still in Russia. He had some boss, and naturally the boss, I guess, developed a hatred for Jews, or always had one. So one day, when during the break, Rabbi Feinstein was praying, he was in the middle of his silent Shmon Esrei. The story goes, I read this in the biography that Rav Nissim Alpert wrote, that Chanoch Teller wrote about Rav Nissim Alpert. Anyway, one day, Moshe Feinstein was praying Shmon Esrei, the silent prayer, and his boss decides, this is the day I'm just going to kill this Jew. So he takes out a weapon. It sounds like it was a gun. It sounds like a pretty radical, wild story. And as he fires the gun, Moshe Feinstein bows down in the middle of Shmona Esrei, and the bullet goes right over his head. And Rabbi Feinstein is so focused on his prayers that he has no idea what just happened. And the boss is sitting there looking at his gun, looking at this young man whose life was just saved miraculously. And from that day forward, he did not bother him. That's how the story goes. I don't know how anybody would know that story. And therefore, I'm a little suspicious of it. I do love stories like this, but I'm also afraid of spreading stories that are not well founded. And I found it funny that somebody should know about this story, unless there was like an eyewitness that, I don't know. What do you say, Moshe?
There are several other versions told of the same story.
Oh, yes?
For what it's worth.
Okay, so suffice to say, there was attempted murder and a great coincidence that saved the rabbi's life.
Right.
Yeah. In any event, it certainly happened when it came to David, right? David was sitting there playing his harp, and at that very moment, he turned over to grab something from the table, maybe get a cup of water or something. At that very moment that Shaul had thrust his spear towards him, David is saved. David turns away and is saved. I don't know, from the text, what would you say? Does David know about this? Does he know about the attempted murder? Or is he completely oblivious to it? Any indication? What do you say?
I think he's oblivious to it. And the magic hand Hashem was doing his thing.
That's what it says it happens twice. After it happens one time, you better run out of that house. So anyway, the fact that it happened twice maybe is an indication he really didn't know what was doing. I'll share something in a moment that seems to indicate otherwise. David was successful in all of his ways, and God was with him. And Shaul became exceedingly afraid of David. Everybody loved him. This is an interesting, I couldn't find anything about this. In verse number 17, it says, V'chol Yisrael v'Yehuda v'hevet David. All of the Jewish people and Yehuda loved David. Kihu yotzeh uba lifnehem, because he would go and come in front of them. I'm sorry, I skipped some verses. I apologize. But I wondered why Yehuda was singled out over here. Sometimes in war, you would single out Yehuda because they were a strong force that fought on their own.
I think
But in this
perhaps
case-
it was written after the kingdom split.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
that's my guess. The only thing that bothers me and what we did, says here in verse 10, the next day an evil spirit of God gripped Saul. I don't
Yes.
think evil spirits as being of God. I don't.
Yes.
That bothers me. So,
Yeah. This is the second time we see that expression. I think that means that by the first times where you'd have the commentaries, that this was people get sad, but this was exceptionally sad. I mean, God had, so to speak, like stirred the pot a little bit to make Shaul exceptionally depressed, and cause him to need possibly for the providence, that was the providence to get David into his palace. But I don't know. It's a good question. It's the evil spirit of God. It sounds like God was involved in inflicting this evil spirit upon him. Yes, but as we say, the evil does not come forth from Hashem. So
I think so.
yeah, I just wanted to go back. I skipped an important verse here. In verse number 14, it says, "Vayisireu Shaul me'imo." Shaul removed David from his presence, and rather he made him a Sar Aleph, a leader of 1,000. They had broken up into groups of 1,000. So David was promoted to become a leader of 1,000. And the intention of Shaul, the Mefarshim say, was that he hoped that David would die in battle. By making him in charge of 1,000, he would naturally have to go into battles. And his hope was to kill him. But sure enough, there were no wars. There was no attack upon Israel at that time. And rather, David would just go and come with the people and with the soldiers, and everybody absolutely loved him. So now Shaul has a new plot. Shaul decides, I never paid up, and Shaul had promised a reward to the one who kills Goliath. He would give a daughter to marry. So he said, I never paid up, and this is a great opportunity to use as a pretext, or to use as an excuse to get David killed. So he says to him, this is Pasuk 17. Vayomer Shaul el David, Hineh viti agdola Meirav. I have my eldest daughter. Her name is Meirav. I will give her to you as a wife. But listen, she's my oldest daughter. I didn't promise my oldest daughter, but this is like a special gift. Right? The firstborn daughter, the oldest daughter of the king. Therefore, I want you to be a valiant soldier, and I want you to fight the wars of God. And Shaul said to himself, let him fight wars, and the Philistines will kill him. Meaning what's changing now is rather than just promoting him to be a Sar Elef, which he had done already, the leader of 1,000, he was now telling him to actively pursue wars. This is how the Malbim learns it. Previously, he was just hoping that if I put David in charge of the army, people are going to fight against him and he'll die. Now he's directly telling him to engage in battle with the Philistines. I want you to start a fight. And his hope was, okay, by doing this, he's going to get killed. And the excuse was, since you're going to be my son-in-law and you're marrying my most important daughter, I need you to do heroic things. And David's response is interesting. He says, Mi anochi, or mi chayai, who am I, and what is my life worth? Mishpacha tavi be'Yisrael. The only thing I have going for me is my father's family. Yishai's family was an important one. But other than that, who am I? Me, I'm just like a lowly guy. I should be the Chassan, the son-in-law of the king. So David is trying to reject the offer to be a son-in-law of Shaul. Now revealing that when he killed Goliath, he did not want to marry one of the king's daughters. And he's humbly rejecting the offer and saying, no, who am I? I just saw from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, he said, perhaps David is senses something is funny here. Perhaps he actually realized what was happening with the spears. Like, that was a near miss. Okay, once and then twice there was a near miss with a spear. Maybe David suspected that Shaul was up to something, and therefore he was being cautious here, and he did not actually want to marry any daughter of Shaul because he was afraid. But you can't deny the offer for too long. But it happened to be, this is verse number 19. It was at the time when Mirav was meant to be given to David, that they discovered that she had already been given to another man, Adriel HaMecholati Leisha. Another man had already married her, which could happen. You know, she went out, she had a nice time in the park, and she met a man, and he offered a kiddushin, and she accepted. So she was already married. There is an opinion in the Gemara in Sanhedrin that, in fact, she was married to David, and this second person, Adriel, married her illegally. She was already an Ish, and then she died, and he ended up marrying Michal. But the standard story and the way that most of the Rishonim take over here is that he never ended up marrying the eldest daughter of Shaul. Okay.
Was Shaul part of that marriage?
It seems like not. It seems like she just accepted the marriage offer from somebody already, and nobody.
Because as I read this, and I'm reading a different version of my version of the Tanakh is 1917 version, and it kind of gives me the impression is that Saul did this as part of his hatred for David.
But to offer the daughter and then give the daughter to somebody else.
Yeah. Yes.
Interesting. My only the problem with that is that you see that he's strategizing to get David killed, and so it would be to Saul's advantage to have David marry his daughter, because that's going to lead David to go into wars. So it's funny that he should sabotage his own plot. And the truth is, the Hebrew text says that she was given to another man, and who can give a daughter to another man if not the father?
Right.
So it certainly seems like that, but let's see. Rashi says, interestingly, he writes an interesting thing. He says, when the time came that they had said that they would give Merav to David, while they were still involved in trying to, settle the deal, nidgalgel hadavar venitna la'adriel. The matter, developed, and she ended up being given to Adriel, which does sound like maybe Shaul changed his mind. Maybe another person came and negotiated a better offer. It's interesting. So we don't really have the inside scoop. How did she get married to another man at the last minute? But anyways, he did not end up marrying Meirav. But lo and behold, there was another daughter. V'tehav Michal bat Shaul David. Michal was another daughter of Saul, and she loved David. V'yigidu l'Shaul v'yishar devar b'einav. Shaul hears that he has another daughter who loves David, and this was great. He liked that, because he thought to himself, let me give my daughter to David, and I'll make him fight the Plishtim to prove that he's a worthy son-in-law, and the son-in-law naturally is going to be the one who's leading the armies, and he'll get killed. So Shaul turns to David and he says to him, B'shtayim titchaten bi hayom. You're going to marry one of my two daughters. You couldn't marry Meirav, so I'll give you the other daughter, Michal. But interestingly, it says, Vaytzav Shaul et avadav dabru David balat lemor. Apparently, David did not accept the offer right away. Shaul had to send his servants to appease David and try to convince him to do this, which sounds, again, like Rabbi Kamenetsky was suggesting, that David was trying to reject the offer because he suspected something was wrong. But the servants of Shaul come to David in private, and they say, the king likes you, and all of his servants like you. He wants to make you a son-in-law. You should marry his daughter, right? So on Shaul's request, his servants are trying to encourage David to marry Michal. And they speak to David, and David replies, Hanikala be'inechem itchaten b'melech. You think it's a light matter to marry into the king's family? Anuchi ish rash v'nikle. I am a poor person and a simple person. I can't afford a dowry, for the king's daughter. What can I give? I'm poor, and I'm simple. I'm not important enough. Again, showing his humility. And this was perfect. He's falling in right into Shaul's hands. Because Shaul is saying, no, I don't want any money. So they report back to Saul and they tell him how David rejected. So Shaul says, tell him the following thing. I don't want money. The king does not desire a dowry of money. Rather, get me 100 orlot, plishtim, 100 foreskins from plishtim, right? Kill them and bring me their foreskins, and that will be the dowry. Show that you're a valiant warrior, and then you can marry my daughter, and I don't need any money from you. You should just fight against the enemies of the king. And again, the Navi emphasizes that entire time Shaul's real plan was to get David killed. So the servants come back to David. Vayishar b'nei David litchaded mamelech. He says, oh, to do that, to kill the king's enemies, that I can do. V'lo mal'u hayamim. And the deadline did not even come yet. Apparently, Shaul made a deadline. If he can kill 100 plishtim by the X date, then he can marry my daughter. The deadline did not even arrive. Vayakom David, vayalechu v'anashav vayach b'plishtim 200 ish. And David goes and kills not 100 but 200 Philistines, and he brings their orlas, their foreskins, to Shaul, vayimalum lamelech, and they deposit them to the king. So sure enough, he has to give over his daughter Michal as a wife because David really proved himself. Not even 100, he did double the amount that Shaul had asked, and he did it before the deadline had even arrived. Once again, proving that Hashem was with him, that he was extremely worthy to be a leader amongst the Jewish people, and as the verse states, it's only increased Saul's fear and nervousness and anxiety about David. This is what the Navi emphasizes in Pasuk 28. That's where we are. Vayar Shaul vayida. Shaul saw this and he knew Ki Hashem im David. Once again, he knew that God is with David. Umichal bat Shaul ahevatu. And he also was fearful because his daughter loved David. Now he's got somebody in his own family, another person, not just Jonathan, but now he sees that his daughter loves David so much that if she gets wind of any plot to kill David, she's going to tell her husband. That's another reason why Saul was fearful. That's what the prophet is saying here. He was afraid that he saw that Hashem was guiding David, and he was also afraid that his own daughter loved David so much that she could foil and certain plans that he had. So that's what the pasuk is saying. So Shaul increased his hatred and Shaul increased his fear of David, and Shaul was an enemy of David kol hayamim, all of the days, which is a very tragic statement. The great Saul has now fallen to become an enemy of the future king of Israel. Vayitzu sarei plishtim. There's a small little paragraph here in the Hebrew. It's the last verse in chapter 18. But in the Navi, it serves as its own paragraph, its own section. And it says that the officers of the Plishtim came. And when they came out to battle against the Jews, David was more successful than all the servants of Shaul. And his name became very outstanding, very precious. The Midrash says something interesting here. The Philistines knew a thing or two about Judaism, and they realized that David just got married, so there should be a mitzvah for him to avoid going into battle for 1 year. This is what the concept that we call Shana Rishona, Nakiyeh Lebeito. The Torah says that upon getting married, a husband should not go to war for an entire year. He should stay home with his wife to develop the relationship, etc. He should not go out to the lines of war for the first year. So the Philistines realized that David just got married. So they said, oh, what an opportune time to strike. When their secret weapon is home with his wife, we can now fight. But they didn't know. Vayikar Shmo me'od. That is, Vayikar Shmo, the Medrash says this means that he was exceedingly outstanding in his Torah scholarship. Because he knew that there's a difference. There are wars and there are wars. The only war that the newlywed is exempt from is a milchemet reshut, a voluntary war. But if it's a milchemet mitzvah, if it's a mitzvah, a command to fight this war, then even the groom under the canopy should leave his wedding and go fight in milchemet mitzvah. When what's a milchemet mitzvah? What's a milchemet reshut? What's the difference between optional and obligatory? The conquering of Eretz Yisrael, the conquering of the land, was a milchemet reshut, was an obligation. Hashem commanded us to fight the enemies within Israel, so that we take over the land. So any fighting against the Plishtim is under the category of milchemet mitzvah, an obligatory war, and therefore the exemption of a year did not apply to David. The Philistines didn't know that because they're just reading they just know how to read, but they don't know the Talmud. Yeah, but David knew how to learn, and he realized that this exemption didn't apply to him. So sure enough, when they showed up to battle, they were dismayed to see that their number one enemy was there. Vayikar Shmo me'od, that he was exceedingly good in his Torah scholarship, which is a fascinating little midrash. It's just interesting it's always interesting to have insights that the enemy kind of knows the traditions and the religion of his enemy. You have it with Amalek as well, who we're going to be recalling soon, right? They knew the Jewish weak points, the Jewish history, enough to make a mess. Here too, the Philistines knew enough Judaism to try to take advantage.
Did the Talmud exist at the time of David?
No, I was being accused. The Talmud did not exist, but I meant to say the process of Talmud, of extracting mitzvahs from the text and understanding the fullness of them. Yeah. Okay. They certainly learned Torah. They just didn't have the text of the Talmud as we have. Okay. Now things get even spicier. So we've seen already multiple attempts to kill David. He literally tried to throw a spear at him twice. He then made him a Sar Elef, hoping that this would mean he'd go into battle, but there was no actual attack from the enemy. So then, as a reward for marrying his daughter, he says, or as a condition to marry his daughter, he says, I want you to go to the front lines and fight against Plishtim. I want you to actively pursue battle. That marriage falls through. So then he offers him Michal in exchange for 100 Plishtim's lives. So that's four attempts so far to kill David, at least. Yeah. And none of them go. So here it gets even worse. It's at the beginning of chapter 19. By the Ber Shaul el Yonatan beno vel kol avadav. Avadav Shaul speaks to Jonathan, who remember loves David, and to all of his servants, lahamit et David, to kill David.
At this point, David has been anointed. But does David realize that he is the king by the anointment, or is it?
So it's interesting. The anointment does not make him the active king of Israel. It just makes him now fit to be the king. But until he's actually serving as the king, he's not the king.
Right.
So he has to be accepted by the people, etc., in order to actively be the king. So if he would, for example, claim at this moment that he's the king, if David would say, I'm the rightful king, that is treason, and he would be liable to the death penalty, and he would deserve the death penalty, rightfully. It's an interesting in-between period. There's like this twilight area.
Right.
But here, the truth is, Shaul was 100% considered the king of Israel at this point. He was the functioning king. David was decided that he's going to be the next king. He was already anointed and ready, just waiting. He's on deck, but he's not officially the king until he's accepted by the people. But that's actually an appropriate question for this very moment. Shaul tells Jonathan and his servants to kill David. What this meant most likely was he sent out a verdict that David committed treason. He's trying to take over my throne. He might have made up some story, and therefore he deserves death. He wasn't just hiring mercenaries to kill David. He was trying to say that David deserves death because he was mored b'malchut. He committed treason. He's rebelling against the king. There was an interesting source I wanted to share with you. I'll just share it at this moment. In all of the attempts of Shaul to kill David, every effort he makes ends up bolstering David in the eyes of the people and only increasing the esteem that people have for David. Exactly the opposite of what Shaul is trying to do happens. When he throws the spear at him, it's a manifest miracle. Hashem, you've only greater shown God's love for David. When he throws him into the lines of battle, you give David even more success, and people love him even more, to the point where it says that all of Israel and Yehuda loved David. You're just pushing God's plan forward. As Shaul is trying to erase God's plan, he really is only pushing it forward. It's a fascinating example of human beings trying to interfere with God's plans and only helping it along. Yeah. God is the ultimate power, and he can bring out any end that he wants, even using the very choices that we make that try to foil his plans. God will use our choices to bring about his plans. There's no better time to reflect on it than now. Right? We're in the month of Adar, when Haman was trying and plotting everything, and every step that Haman took against the Jews ended up working to help them. The day that he made to fight against us ended up being a ticket for us to fight against our enemies, etc., etc. It's just awesome, right? It inspires awe to see the hashgacha, the providence of Hashem, and how he's able to manipulate and control events the way he wants. Not taking away the free will of Shaul, that's the point. We're using the free will decisions of Shaul. He brings out God's plan. Okay, so Shaul tells Jonathan and his servants to kill David. But the very same verse says that Yehonatan ben Shaul chafetz b'David me'od. This is a great example of the Al-Sheikh's principle. You recall the Al-Sheikh we said last week wonders why sometimes the letter Hey is added to Jonathan's name. There's Yonatan, Jonathan, and Yehonatan. An extra letter of Hashem's name is included in his name. In this verse, you have both. Shaul speaks to Yonatan without the Hey to kill David. And then it says, and Yehonatan loved David very much. So the Al-Sheikh said, if you recall, that anytime Jonathan is acting in an exceptional way, then he gets the Hey of Hashem included in his name. If he's just doing something that's unremarkable, then you'll refer to him in his regular name, Yonatan. So in the first part of the verse, it's very unremarkable. He is receiving instructions from his father to kill David. The second part of the verse is, even though his father wants to kill him, and even though it might be beneficial for Jonathan that David should die, because he's the inheritor of the throne, he's the heir, nevertheless, Yehonatan still liked David very much. That's why he gets the extra Hey, again, showing his selfless love that he had for David. At that point, he gets promoted to Yehonatan. This is a beautiful little example of that principle. Okay. So Jonathan says to David, he spills the beans, right? He tells David the secret. My father wants to kill you. Please be cautious and stay in a secret place tomorrow and hide yourself. And I'm going to give you a report. I'm going to stand near my father in the field, and I'll speak to my father about you, and let's see what happens. Let's see how Shaul reacts, and I will tell you. Okay, I'd like to proceed here. I want to deal with this next section as one big whole. So with your permission, I think we'll hold it here for tonight. It's we normally go for a few more minutes, but I think we'll hold it here for tonight. There's a few things I want to clarify in my own learning before presenting the next section. So here's a nice stopping point. It's chapter 19. God willing, next week we'll pick up at chapter 19, right? Next Thursday. It's fair game. No holidays, no vacations. God willing. Okay. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. And thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.